We describe politics as left-wing and right-wing all the time. The Labour left, the Conservative right, centre-left, centre-right, hard left, hard right. Politicians can move left, drift right, occupy the centre, or, after a bad election, discover that the centre has apparently moved without telling them. But why are political ideas called left and right at all? There is no law of nature saying higher taxes belong on the left and lower taxes belong on the right. The answer begins not with socialism or capitalism, but with where people happened to sit during the French Revolution. In 1789, France was being transformed by revolution. Representatives were arguing over how much power the king should keep and how far the old political order should be dismantled. Those more sympathetic to royal authority and traditional institutions tended to sit to the right of the presiding officer. Those demanding greater change and greater limits on the king tended to sit to the left. It was not a carefully designed political theory. Nobody entered the chamber with a diagram saying conservatism over there, revolution over here, and somebody leaves a little space in the middle for future centrists. It was a seating arrangement, but the language stuck. The right became associated with hierarchy, tradition, and established institutions. The left became associated with reform, equality, and changing the existing order. The important thing is that left and right have never meant exactly the same thing forever. In the 18th century, politicians were not arguing about nationalising railways or corporation tax. The big questions concerned monarchy, aristocracy, religion, representation, and who should possess political power. Then industrialisation transformed society. Factories expanded, cities grew, and a huge industrial working class emerged. Politics increasingly became about wages, working conditions, trade unions, property, and the distribution of wealth. Socialism became associated with the left because it placed greater emphasis on economic equality and collective action. Conservatism remained associated with the right through its emphasis on property, established institutions, and gradual rather than revolutionary change. Liberalism complicated things because liberals could be radical on political rights while strongly supporting private property and free markets. That gives us our first warning. Political labels move because politics moves. Very broadly, the economic left places more emphasis on equality, redistribution, and public provision. That can mean progressive taxation, stronger welfare systems, greater regulation, or public ownership of some services. The economic right generally puts more emphasis on private property, markets, lower taxation, and limiting the economic role of government. But economics is only one dimension. On social and cultural questions, the left is often associated with social reform and a more liberal approach to personal behaviour. The right is often associated with tradition, social order, and national identity. The word often is doing quite a lot of work there. Real voters are messy. Someone can favour generous public spending while holding socially conservative views. Someone else can support low taxes while being extremely liberal on social issues. Human beings, inconveniently for political diagrams, do not always fit neatly onto one line because they are useful shortcuts. Politics contains thousands of arguments. How much should government tax? What should the state provide? How powerful should trade unions be? How should immigration work? How quickly should society change? The left-right spectrum gives voters a rough way of organising those debates. It tells you that two parties probably begin from different instincts before you read every page of their manifestos. But a shortcut is not a complete explanation. Calling somebody left-wing does not tell you everything they believe. Calling somebody right-wing does not either. In Britain, the Labour movement grew from trade unionism, working class organisation, and socialist politics, placing Labour broadly on the left. The conservative tradition became associated with the right through its emphasis on property, established institutions, and, particularly in more recent periods, market economics. But neither party has occupied exactly the same position throughout its history. Conservative governments have sometimes accepted substantial welfare provision and state intervention. Labour governments have sometimes embraced markets and private enterprise more enthusiastically than earlier generations of the party. Parties move because voters move. Circumstances change and elections have to be won. That is also why we talk about centre-left and centre-right. Successful democratic parties often combine ideas from different traditions, rather than remaining permanently at an ideological extreme. Not perfectly. American politics does not map exactly onto British politics, and French politics does not map exactly onto either. Religion, nationalism, regional identity, and attitudes to the state can produce combinations that look strange on a simple horizontal line. That is why political scientists sometimes use more than one axis, separating economic views from social or authoritarian liberal views. Those models can be helpful, but none has replaced left and right in everyday politics. More than 200 years after the French Revolution, we still describe modern politicians according to which side of a revolutionary assembly their ideological ancestors might have occupied. History has a sense of humour like that. There is one final complication. When politicians say they occupy the centre, it sounds like the centre is a fixed point. It is not. An idea considered radical in one generation can become ordinary in another. Universal voting rights were once revolutionary. So were many features of the modern welfare state. Left and right are therefore relative positions as well as ideological traditions. They describe where political forces stand compared with one another at a particular moment. The furniture stays put, the politics does not. So, why are political parties called left and right? Because during the French Revolution, defenders of royal authority and tradition broadly sat on one side of an assembly, while advocates of greater political change sat on the other. Those positions became labels. The labels survived. And, over 2 centuries, they absorbed completely new arguments about capitalism, socialism, welfare, taxation, culture, nationalism, and the role of the state. Today, the left is broadly associated with equality, redistribution, and social reform. The right is broadly associated with markets, property, tradition, and social order. But neither side is one single ideology, and neither label tells you everything about a political party. Left and right are not laws of politics. They are historical shortcuts, useful ones, occasionally confusing ones, and they exist because, more than 200 years ago, a group of French politicians needed somewhere to sit. But knowing where parties sit on the political spectrum raises another question. How do all those different political opinions become actual seats in Parliament? In Britain, the answer is first past the post, a system that can produce a parliamentary majority without anything close to a majority of the national vote. So, is first past the post actually fair? That is where our future politics brief is going. This has been the Nelson Brief, the context behind the story.